let's talk about Britain. How do you think things are going here? I guess that's the question. We're a year into this Labour government. I think it's fair to say it's been very patchy for them. I don't disapprove of your suggestion that we should let governments get on with it, see how they get on with it, and then issue our judgment when that time comes around. But I think it's pretty clear that they're not very popular. They're not doing a good job on the migration front. They're not doing a good job on the housing issue that you mentioned. They're not doing a good job on lots of things that people have expectations of them to do. What's your general taking of the temperature in relation to the Labour government right now?
Well, I think the Labour government is largely an irrelevance. They are attempting to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, to use that overused metaphor. And what I mean by that is, I just think the state of the economy is such that unless you're prepared to be radically honest with people and say to them, look, the solution to our problems is twofold. On the one hand, we need to create more jobs and we need to generate more revenue and business in the economy. And in order to do that, instead of having the statistic that we're losing more millionaires than any country in the world except China, now consider per capita and you start to really get the picture, we are driving out people who are creating the jobs, historically speaking. And not only that, Brendan, anecdotally, I can tell you that we're also driving the people who are not currently wealthy, who will be creating the jobs over the next 10 years, except they're not going to be creating them here. They're going to be creating them in Dubai. They're going to be creating them in America. They're going to be creating them in other parts of the world where the business environment is much more favorable to them, where they're not going to get taxed to the eyeballs, when they're not going to be prevented from doing business. So that's the first part. And the second part, I'm afraid, is there's a deep dishonesty about whether we can afford to have the level of public spending that we have. And that includes the fact that hundreds of thousands of young people are now on unemployment benefit because they're depressed or because they're anxious or because there are other things. And I don't know about you. Of course, you've got to make this very clear. There are some people who are really badly disabled and need our support. There are some people who have clinical depression, for whom getting out of bed might be a challenge that they struggle with. But I can tell you that I have been depressed and anxious and many of those things at many points in my career, including when I was doing minimum wage jobs, when I couldn't finish my degree. My parents couldn't afford for me to finish university, and I just had to make my way in the world. And I remember going to employment offices and sweating and feeling really uncomfortable and being really anxious and, being depressed because I had a shitty job that I didn't like and all of those things. And the point is, that is part of life that you have to work through. You don't just sit on benefits because you don't feel comfortable. And far, far too many people in our country are now in that position. And they are in that position because we let them be in that position. Because we say, well, not allowing you to be in that position is cruel, it's unkind, you need support and blah, 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 blah. And the truth is, we simply can't afford to do that. We simply can't afford to do that. So I don't see the Labour government. Look, they're not very competent. They're not very bright. There's a massive dearth of talent. Of course there is on the front bench. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is a woman who, I don't see any serious competence or personality there that's going to deal with these issues seriously. Their attempts to do so are backfiring because, of course, they promised all these things to their own fringe. And so the moment they try to cut any of the public spending we're talking about, these people start spitting the dummy out of the pram. The reality is, I think the problems in Britain are structural. I actually wrote an article a long time ago predicting all of this would happen, that all this wave of supposed enthusiasm would evaporate pretty quickly when we realized that the problems that Britain actually faces are structural in nature. And addressing them is going to be a big challenge. And I don't see this government as capable of doing anything about it significantly, which is why I must confess I'm becoming a bit of an accelerationist, Brendan, which is every time something goes wrong, I actually kind of deep down inside think it's probably a good thing, because come the next election, we at least will know that there's a real choice on the table. Either reform gets in and gets a chance to really shake things up, or is going to carry on like this forever. And I honestly don't think that Britain can sustain this for a very long time, because we are becoming a bit of a joke country.
It's so important to raise those structural questions, as you call them, because there is a tendency for those questions to get lost in the discussions that we have about all the other swirling issues that, interrupt political life all the time. And I think you put that well there. But I do want to ask you, however, having said that, I want to ask you about a couple of the cultural, social issues that we face in this country that government and others have not done a good job of addressing. You might see these as structural issues as well, I don't know. But I did want to ask you about the grooming gangs phenomenon, or the rape gangs, as I think people now accept they should be called. Some of us have been talking about them for a long time, raising concerns about them. There are people who've been talking about it for longer even than you and I. There have been people who've been blowing the whistle, going back years and years and years, and often being treated very badly for having done so. It still feels like, even though there's the promise of an inquiry, even though the government now finally seems to accept it, it's not far right to talk about this question, having said it was, it still seems like a very unresolved issue. It still seems like something the government is addressing under duress rather than willingly. What's your overview on that? How did this happen, and why does it feel, even now, still quite difficult to have an honest reckoning with ourselves about what happened?
Well, I think the answer to your question is contained within the way you asked it, which is, if it's still, after all this time, difficult for a Labour government to deal with it, that tells you quite a lot about why these things happened in the first place. Yeah. There was a culture of pretending this wasn't an issue. There was a culture of trying to protect the truth from being released to the public. There was a culture of victim blaming, let's be honest. There was a culture of attempting to suppress this information from coming out, because a lot of people would have egg on their face, and they thought that was more important than the mass rape of in many cases, disadvantaged English British girls, and across the country. Right. It's a terrible crime, and what we really need is an inquiry that produces a kind of truth and reconciliation process. But in addition to reconciliation, I'd like there to be quite a lot of justice, Brendan. I want justice to be meted out to the people who were involved in this. I want justice to be meted out to the people who were involved in covering it up, ignoring it, concealing it from the public, and so on and so forth. I want to see deportations of the people we can deport. I want to see people stripped of their citizenship if they have dual nationality. I want the full force of the law to be applied here, and some very, very harsh sentences to be handed out. And I'm deeply unembarrassed about saying that I want the full force of the British criminal justice system to be applied. I want a lot of new criminal offences to be introduced around this issue, and this must never be allowed to happen again. And in order for that to happen, I think we have a long way to go.